Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is Dev Diary number 1 for Victoria 3. This one is about pops, and what a combination of words strung together to a sentence that I never thought I would be saying. Victoria 3 and its first Dev Diary. Now we're going to take a look at that. There is some really interesting information in here that we didn't know. There's also a lot of information that we already knew, but of course you gotta start somewhere, so it makes a lot of sense. I just want to point out that we reached 50,000 subscribers, and for that I invited Frederick Wester, the former CEO and current executive chairman of the board, onto a stream that will be on Sunday at 7 PM CEST if you want to join. It will be interesting. I think we will be talking a lot about the history of Paradox. That is something that I am most certainly interested in because he has been there basically since the start. If you're interested in that, the link is in the description. And now for the moment, let's just jump into the Dev Diary. Thank you, Mikhail, by the way, the lead game designer, for writing the Dev Diary. Pops were introduced in the very first Victoria game to represent your country's population. Pop mechanics have since snuck into other Paradox titles like Stellaris and Imperator, but this in-depth population simulation is what Victoria is about, and we're going to bring you a system with more depth than ever before. That is lovely to hear. I remember playing Victoria Revolutions. I started playing it, honestly I can't quite remember when I played it. It was fairly late. I played Hearts of Iron 2 and EU3 before that, but it was incredibly unique. It was incredibly different. I mean, also incredibly different from Victoria 2. Victoria 2 was a huge step up from Victoria 1, but I have to tell you, it always was very unique, and I don't think that any of the other games that have pops and that try to capture pops really captured it ever in the sense that, you know, Victoria does, because Victoria simply is just really laser focused on this issue. This is truly the main aspect of the game. In Victoria 3, pops are the country's engine. They work the industries, they pay the taxes, they operate the government institutions, and they fight the wars. They're born, they die, they change occupation, they migrate, and they organize, get angry, and start revolutions. Every pop is visualized so you can see which demographic sports the best moustache. Note that pop portraits are very much work in progress. Now, I want to highlight that it is very much work in progress, but I have to tell you, this is a really good portrait. I personally actually think that the 3D characters that we have seen so far from Victoria 3 are honestly the highlights when it comes to 3D characters outside of Crusader Kings 3. Imperator Rome sadly is not even close to being able to compete. I really do hope that these are slightly animated, you know, with a idle animation essentially, because I think that this is a glorious mustache, but more importantly, this is just, it looks really nice. It looks on topic, it looks beautiful in the theme. It would be interesting, but I think that is impossible, so I don't want to raise your expectations or your hopes here. It would be interesting if they actually, like, you know, a clergyman in 1836 isn't wearing the same thing as a clergyman in 1936, but I'll be honest with you, I think this is just, that might take it a bit too far, because you need the situation where you can always identify who it is, and different clothing styles might make that a lot harder to actually see it visually. Anyway, you're not in charge of the pops and can't manipulate them directly, of course. Imperator did that initially, for example. They tried the other approach where it's essentially a lot of microing of the pops. It has changed ever since. It is a different game, a very different beast at this point, but I think that it's indeed a mistake to say, hey, we should take these pops and we should make them not independent. They should highly depend on what you do with them, because at the end of the day, again, the living world that Victoria 2 attempted to achieve is something that is really the huge appeal. What pops do in any game that introduces them, I know Mario and Texas, right? Also for EU4, it's a mod. Try to introduce pops. I think they have introduced pops, and it's all about the automatic life that they live. It's never about the fact that you can interact with them directly. It's more about the fact you look at a pie chart, for example, and you say, look at them pops, look at them pops, and then, you know, 10 years later you look at the pie chart and you say, look at them pops, right? It's that experience. It's not the experience of microing a pop to move to Berlin, for example, from, I don't know, Brandenburg, to make it so that they can actually work a job, you know, instead of living in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so I think they got the basic vision here essentially completely correct. A large part of your game will consist of trying to sate your population's appetites for material goods or political reform, but most actions you will take aren't to the benefit of every pop in your nation, and by making life better for one part of the population, you may inadvertently upset another demographic. Now, of course, it's true, populations will have political leanings, it seems, populations will have religion and culture, and I assume that there is certainly a bunch of mechanics there related to that. One of the most interesting questions that I actually got a lot of times on the Victoria 3 coverage that I have done so far is the question whether you can play an absolutist monarchy that is very good-willed. Let's call it that, right? So essentially you give no political rights to your population, but you go out of your way to say, hey, here's a insurance, here's a I don't know, you can vote for something that doesn't actually know this parliament, doesn't actually do anything, but you can vote for it. Maybe there's no child labor, that sort of stuff. And maybe you could do that and not get toppled. Maybe there wouldn't be a rebellion if people actually say, this is kind of a good king. This is somebody that I like. It definitely sounds like it does. I mean, they in particular say here, material goods or political reform. I don't think that means it's exclusive from one another. And, of course, these are both things that pops are interested in. But I am interested in seeing what sort of alternative playthroughs we could have in Victoria 3 in a system that is even more flexible than Victoria 2. The most important aspects of POPs are their professions, which reflects the type of jobs they carry out in the building where they work. A POP's profession determines its social class and can affect its wages, political strength, what other professions it might qualify for, and particularly which political interest group it's prone to supporting, which you will hear a lot about more in the future dev series. Yeah, political interest groups, of course, are sort of the thing. It has been a bit contentious, right? People, including myself, were essentially saying, hey, if I'm actually living in a parliamentary democracy or in a parliamentary monarchy, for example, in Victoria 3, I would prefer it if my parliament wasn't made up of petite bourgeoisie and intelligentsia and land-owning, whatever they were called. And I actually agree with that, but Martin Anwar, so the game director, made a good point on Twitter as well. He did say we're going to look into that, but of course, for most of the time in this period, even in Europe, or rather especially in Europe, I mean, there was this huge pushback against popular movements starting in 1815, so after the Napoleon was toppled, and all of that stuff made it so that there were no parties, there was only repression, there was only suppression, and I think that interest groups fit that period. But long term, I would really like to see they sort of, work together with parties, maybe as an additional layer, even if it's just in the name, that sort of stuff. Some of the POP professions you will encounter in Victoria 3 are aristocrats, capitalists, bureaucrats, officers, shopkeepers, machinists, laborers, and peasants. Investing in industries that provide job opportunities for the kinds of professions you want to encourage in your country is key to the society-building gameplay of Victoria 3. And there we go, essentially, really shaping society outside of just social action. So going, hey, I would like to be a socialist state, for example, that sort of stuff. Or, hey, I would like to, I don't know, be a monarchy forever or democracy, etc., etc., is one of those things where you need to be very careful, because just being socialist doesn't solve it. You could have a rebellion in Victoria 2 and just surrender to the rebellion, for example, just like let them take you over, but that doesn't mean that everybody now is happy with you being in this new state. You need people that are actually committed to the ideology that you just chose, or that, you just rejected. And I think that is a very good point to make here. I completely agree, actually, when it comes to Victoria as a game series, that really finding a society that is a solution for your POPs, or melding, essentially, mending your POPs into something that fits the solution that you have in mind, is much, much more important than arriving at your solution. And I think that is, again, something that really is well understood by the devs here, it seems. Every variation of profession, culture, religion, and workplace in the world gets its own unique POP. At any given time, this results in many tens of thousands of POPs in the world working, migrating, procreating, and agitating. Let's take a look at this image here. This is an interesting image. Right here we got, what do we have? We got a Turkish, in the state of Diyarbakir, we have Turkish Sunni characters. These are aristocrats in the Ottoman Empire. They are not radical, they are not loyalists, so these are neither very loyal nor very disloyal to the state. They belong to a blue... Oh, this looks like a windmill, so I assume it's some sort of farmers, interest group right there. Political strength is significantly higher. I don't know what the actual, framework, what the actual scale is for the political strength, but it is significantly higher than their actual amount of population. So that might say, I mean, they are aristocrats after all, that they are very important, they can do a lot of things. Discrimination with a star, I assume, means that they are actually privileged. I assume that this means, hey, this pop group is privileged over others, instead of rather, hey, they are disprivileged, we took away privilege from them. Literacy is 50%, that is quite decent at the time, of course. Net income is 0.85 thousand of pounds. So again, there is no multiple currencies in Victoria 3. I think that would be a bit too in-depth. I really, really like the outfit. I feel like the textures might be a bit, or could be a bit clearer, but then again, this is just an early screenshot, and who knows just, how far zoomed out this image actually is once you see it in Victoria 3, but that is really besides the point. The population is growing, they got some money, so this is their overall wealth, which determines their standard of living. Then we got the workforce of them is 1,740, so you can see that the dependents, so pensioners, children, maybe widows, anybody that really isn't allowed to work is essentially in these dependents. You can, or can't work, you can really see that the dependents are significantly more. I mean, if you think about it, as an aristocrat in the Ottoman Empire, I'm sure, you might have a wife, and then you might have like 6 or 7 children, you might have parents that you take care of, you might have your wife's parents that you take care of, so this is most certainly a number that seems to be working. I want to point out, in this context, Oh, and actually I just noticed the net income. I mean, it does say here just this number, but I don't think this is their wealth. I think this is the net income because it's essentially, it's the same number, right? It's just rounded off in the right to the net income there. I thought it was actually the wealth, but I don't think it is. Now, with that being said, in Victoria 2, you did not have dependents modeled. They didn't exist. In Victoria 2, you had 25% of the world population roughly modeled, and those were the people that you can see right here. Those are the active, the workforce people, and the rest simply was not modeled at all. Wealthy landowners, old money with old connections. As owners of farms and plantations, they contribute some of their profits to the investment pool. The investment pool, we talked about that. That is something that they decided to do where if you're an aristocrat, if you're a capitalist, and maybe if you're an officer, I'm not quite sure about the officer part, but if you're one of those groups, then you, instead of investing directly in, you know, factory of your choosing, like they did in Victoria 2, in Victoria 3 they will go and they will have an investment pool that the player can then choose and, you know, essentially put money down where they really want to see it invested. That is primarily, I think, because in Victoria 2 it really didn't work that much. I mentioned that as well in the video. The capitalists were quite... I mean, annoying is a word that is far too friendly, but I'm going to stick with that one. And I think the investment pool is a solution, you know, a mechanical solution, but I also think that, of course, it takes a bit away if you are truly a very liberal democracy or, you know, anything really that is totally capitalist, then maybe the player shouldn't be the one investing. But at the end of the day, if this is the only way that it works, then this has to be this way. What we talked about in the comments for another video was essentially saying, hey, we are in a situation where we have the investment pool, and it might be cool if the investment pool gets auto-invested, you know, whenever you do something, essentially. So the investment pool will do it itself like it did in Victoria 2, but if you have the favor of, for example, the capitalist-leaning factions, so the landowners, you know, the aristocrats, etc., etc., so the rich people, then you might be able to lobby them where to invest the investment pool, which then gives you the opportunity to do it directly. That is not how it is in the game, but I thought this was just an interesting perspective. It was raised by one of the viewers in the comments. As you know, I read all the comments, and that was quite interesting. I thought, let me know what you think. I think the investment pool solves an issue, but at the end of the day, it takes a bit, you know, of freedom away that existed in the other game. I don't know what this means, by the way. Monocle? I don't even know how you pronounce it in English, but yeah, I have no idea what that is. They're part of the upper class, of course they are. We got 244,000 of aristocrats in the Ottoman Empire. They have a political strength of 1.55 million. And their support is for the local governor, 74.8%. Armed forces, 17.7%. Sunni Madrash, so I assume these are all factions, these are all interest groups. So you have the local governors, which would... Oh man, that sounds so cool. That sounds like there is a direct force that wants to essentially destabilize your central rule. You know, maybe that is their agenda. They want decentralization. They want more funds for their specific provinces, maybe depending on in which provinces they are. Then we have the armed forces, 17.7%, of course, and Sunni madrasas. So I just looked that up, and Sunni madrasas, if I get this correct, if I don't, then please do let me know in the comments, but it essentially means the Sunni schools, so I assume just generally religion, essentially, and only pops with adequate wealth can become aristocrats, potential increases with greater wealth and to a lesser degree literacy. Pops whose culture face discrimination take a much longer time. Officers and bureaucrats have a particularly easy time becoming aristocrats. Yeah, there you go. So that is honestly quite the interesting description. I think we got everything that is interesting on this image. I'm very interested when it comes to the actual income, when it comes to the wealth, when it comes to the standard of living. Oh, this is the standard of living, but you still have to see that they were talking about the leftover money, actually, that defines what your standard of living is. So I'm not entirely certain. I don't think this means their standard of living. This is clearly just the income, so it's an operative amount rather than amount that they have in, you know, their pockets. But we'll see about that when the game, or rather when they talk about it a bit more. Members of the workforce keep the buildings in the game operational and collect a wage from them in return. Those who cannot or aren't permitted to be officially employed are considered dependents. They collect only a small income from odd jobs and government programs. Laws of factor is included in each category, of course. At game start, most countries do not accept women working and collecting a wage outside the home, but by reforming laws governing the rights of women, more dependent pops will enter the workforce over time. This will be, hopefully, incredibly interesting, primarily because, especially the later wars of Victorian, or rather of the Victorian era, in particular World War I, of course, is a situation, or lead to a situation, where I really want to see the face of a population changing if the war lasts for too long. It's very interesting modeling dependence because it essentially is something that makes this even possible. This would not be a thing of, options here that we have for this game to simulate dependence coming into the workforce because the regular workforce is gone and in the field, and because of that is unable to actually produce any of the supply that is necessary to sustain and maintain the army in the field. I think this is very interesting. I hope that there is indeed a good model for that in the game. By abolishing child labor, the amount of income dependents bring home will decrease, but will make it easier to educate your populace, increasing their overall literacy. That is, of course, also important because it makes it so, if you remember this, what we just read right here, if you can read, if your literacy is higher to a lesser degree, but it does influence it, whether you can become one of the wealthier class pops. Again, this one is indeed a wealthier class, upper class right there, pop type. So I think this is quite interesting. It makes it so that you can change how the dependents behave, despite, of course, the dependents not immediately being a part of your economy or of your society. And I think that is rather interesting. I wonder to what degree, I mean, obviously birth rates are, modeled, but I'm really interested in the birth rate statistics. I hope that there will be statistics for that in the game, because that is definitely something where you could see the effect of, for example, making it very easy to come in, and then you can see, you make it very easy to have a child because it's not that expensive, you can subsidize it, etc. That should drive up the actual birth rate, and then you could either have a situation where you now have more child workers, which is one thing to do, or you have the other situation where now all of a sudden many more people, even from the lower classes, can rise up because their children don't need to work. There's many of the children, and all of a sudden tomorrow we'll have a much higher educated general population that is also larger. I think that could be quite interesting to see. After a bloody war, many dependents and soldiers may be left without sufficient income, and you may decide to institute pensions to help your population recover. There it is. I hope indeed that it is implemented properly. I would be very interested in that. Let's move to the last text here, and that is, I have so much more to say, but that is all for this week. You'll hear much more from the future Dev Diaries. Next week, Martin will return to explain something quite central to the game, capacities. Now, capacities, I'm not sure what they mean. It could be market access capacities, but since this is primarily focused on pops, it seems, maybe we are going to leave the field of pops immediately, but I would doubt it. But if we don't leave it, then, maybe capacities is more about population capacities in provinces and so on and so forth. Please do let me know what you think it is, and do let me know what you think about this dev diary. I think there is a lot of great information here, especially in the sense, why is Victoria 3's pop system better than Victoria 2's? But for the moment, that is all. And with that, I would like to thank the members of the channel that are making videos such as this one possible, namely the Barons, the Counts, and the Dukes. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and I will see you later, alligator.